Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Edward Gangi. Nice to see you, Ed. Let's pretend we haven't just said hello already. Hello.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So Ed and I had a couple of conversations last week, and you're in for a treat, listeners. Ed's written that he's an adoptee, and he's written a book, and writing the book has given him a whole new insight into his own experiences as an adoptee, and we thought that would be an into adoption, and he thought that would be a good jumping off point. So insight, and use the word when we spoke last week about perspective. What does the word insight mean to you, Ed?
Well, Simon, I think it's really a case of having come out of the dark and into the light. As I looked at adoption early in my life, I need to correct that to say I really never looked at adoption early in my life. I knew all my life that I was adopted. And I just plodded along with my life as it was. I was very fortunate to have been adopted by people who were nurturers and treated me as they would have treated a natural born child of their own. So I really had no reason to very deeply consider my adoption, let alone adoption at all. But when curiosity ultimately struck me, and this was quite late in my adulthood, I was approaching my 69th birthday. I finally decided that I would pursue trying to find the identity of the woman who had placed me for adoption. And when I did, a whole new world and a whole new experience opened up before me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Nurturing. That's what we're looking for from our parents, aren't we?
I would certainly say so. I think the one thing this is opinion, I suppose, and it's on a very limited sample, but I've since met my maternal half brother. I've met a paternal half brother. And if there's an argument between nurture versus nature, I think in my case, nurture won out.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's the case?
Well, it's hard to say. My birth mother was deceased by the time I finally did learn her identity. But when I met my maternal brother, who had been raised by her for 50 odd years at that point, the difference between us and the difference between the experiences we both had were very stark. And again, I think, and perhaps it's a matter of geography. I was brought up in urban New York City's environments, and he was brought up in rural southern Georgia. So certainly the opportunities for some of those experiences varied. But I think what was invested in me versus what ultimately was invested in him were rather different things.
Yeah. So what were the most significant things that you found when you came out of the dark into the light?
Yeah, well, I had always in my early years assumed that my birth mother had been one of those young girls who was caught up in the baby scoop era, had gotten pregnant in high school and likely had been sent away, and the baby was taken from her, and she then went on with life as a teenage girl in that era would have. And this is back in 1948, so it's quite some time ago. What I discovered as I started to search was that my mother was not a high school girl. she was 23 years old, that her pregnancy was not managed by somebody else, but she managed it. And that was because she had the resources to do so. She was a celebrity performer in the big ice skating shows that were very popular in the 1930s and 40s and 1950s. And her pregnancy was the result of was the unexpected result of a summer romance.
Yeah.
And so she had the resources to handle the pregnancy. She had the resources and the I guess, for lack of other word, the intellect to manage the adoption process as well, so
Yeah.
that my adoption was privately arranged versus being turned over to the social services network and letting them make arrangements for me.
Yeah. And why was that? Why was that a big? Well, what sort of impact did that have on you? That discovery.
Well, it's interesting. I embarked on this process really out of just curiosity. As I approached my 70th birthday, I knew who I was what I was, and nothing would change by what I found. And I've said a number of times in talking about the book, had I found that my mother's experience was what I originally thought, there would have been no book and there would have been no further pursuit of the story. But when I found out that that she had a career that went beyond the norm, then it built greater curiosity, and I think made me dig in deeper and learn her whole story, which then revealed the what goes into managing a pregnancy, what goes into the decision to surrender a child, and the positive way she did manage that.
Yeah. And how did that change your opinion of her?
I think it gave me absolute and total respect for her, for the strength and the focus that she invested in that decision. She had options as to what she could do with me. And in my perspective, from my feelings, is she made the one that she thought was best for me, not necessarily the easiest for her.
Yeah. And how did that? I mean, you talk about being approaching this from curiosity, not looking from it for. You weren't looking to fill a hole in your life.
No, I was not looking for completion in
You
this.
weren't looking for completion.
No.
But it sounds like, yeah, it it just fueled the fire. Did it
Well,
have any? Did it have any emotional impact on yourself? You're such a gent. You're talking about your view from her perspective. What about your view internally of yeah? What about your own emotional climate? Did it impact your own emotional climate at all, or am I digging for something that isn't there, Ed? Just
well,
tell me if I'm not.
the discovery added to my life.
Yeah,
I found positivity added to my life. The decision to place me as I was placed was something that benefited me, and it was good to learn that it was not an accident. It was an intentional act.
yeah. And just share a little bit of my story on this, and it's probably what's behind my question. So, I'd had a couple of never given my birth mother a lot of thought, and then I had a very short burst of anger towards her, and then a few years later, I found I got this adoption file, And perhaps similar to you, I saw the planning that had gone in. Maybe different to you because you haven't found that. What I found was letters back and forth with the agency showing the extent of the planning ahead of my birth, and after my birth, and also I had there was also a letter to the social worker for me, which really summed up what a desperate position she was in, and her love for me, and as I read that, the tears cascaded down my face, and I felt connected with her through a letter she never thought that I would see, because it wasn't to me, it was to this adoption social worker, and she'd written it 48 years before. But it kind of, it washed away the and made me see how stupid I'd been with this anger. You know, how wrong I'd been with this anger. So that was the perspective that, you know, my curiosity led me down
Sure.
that path, and it was a part of my emotional healing. So that's probably why I'm digging around a bit and to see if there's anything similar to yours. But it sounds like it was a completely different experience.
Yeah, somewhat so, Simon. I think probably the benefit I had and is knowing over all those years that I had been adopted. And I don't know what the mental mechanism was that allowed me to just absorb that fact and then go on with life.
Yeah,
So when I finally started to discover details or get interested enough to pursue details, it really became an academic exercise versus one of a need to,
yeah,
for, as I said, that completion.
yeah,
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 I figured I was 100% complete at that point, or as complete as I'd be.
yeah,
And this added another little bit to that.
yeah. Because I think if we um, my search, I resumed my search because of a flash of fear, of fear of a secondary rejection, and I thought, well, I'm not going to let that stop me. So I ran towards the
Or
process.
the flames.
Yeah, ran towards the flames. Um, did I think it was going to complete me? Probably not, but I thought, well, I'm not going to. It's going to let. I'm not going to let it. This fear stop me. So maybe a little bit of ego there as well. Do you see? Have you other? Have you seen other adoptees pursuing reunion in order to find completion? Have you come across that?
I think I have, and I don't think anybody has expressed it quite that way, at least on the people I've had personal contact with. I certainly see it oftentimes in social media. People are looking to fill a hole that they feel is there, or to at least explain that hole. But I think, there are people out there with the underlying curiosity of I need to know, because I'm not sure who I am is totally who I am. Yeah, that there's more to me and I don't know what that more is.
Yeah.
And
How do you see it being expressed? What sort of words do you see on social about this?
well, I see a range of words from very sympathetic in terms of I'd like to know what my mother's situation is, to rather angry and I'd like to gain reunion so I can confront the person who
Yeah.
made me go through what I've gone. And, I don't judge any of that. My experience is unique to me. I think there's a group of adoptees who, like myself, have just, absorbed adoption and proceeded. Others who have absorbed it but are still questioning. And then another substantial group who, who every day live with some unhappiness or emptiness because of it. And none of those groups are right or wrong. They're just, it's all about personal experience and personal understanding.
Yeah. When you've when we talked last week, you said that you had been part of you've been part of a group, but it had made you uncomfortable. I think it was the word that you used. Yeah. You've been in a
Well,
group.
I think what I refer to is, when I began to reach out to some of the social media groups, I think you sort of found different populations, and a couple uh, were all about the hurt and all about the rejection. And I started, I listened and I started wondering what's wrong with me that I don't feel this. And that's
Oh,
where I started to gain that feeling that, there are other people who don't feel that. I'm one of them. And you need to pick your, you know understand everybody is different, but pick your friends and pick the people that will that provide you with the support that you need.
yeah,
So there are other groups out there who are, they're questioning, but they are, yeah, they're curious, they're questioning, but they're ready to be forgiving, if that's the right word.
yeah. So you started to question yourself for being why were you okay and these people weren't?
Yes.
Yeah,
There's all sorts of talk about, the primal wound and the rejection.
yeah,
And I was sitting there thinking, okay, now let me think, where am I wounded, and where have I been
yeah,
rejected, and what's that done to me? And I couldn't find those places.
yeah,
But there wasn't a flexibility from that side of the coin, saying maybe you've experienced something different than we have.
yeah,
So I again, with full understanding of the other experience, I backed away to a place where,
yeah,
yeah, where I'm comfortable.
yeah. I didn't. I thought that um, maybe because I had this outburst of anger towards my birth mother at 40, I thought that maybe um, adoption had messed me up, and I hadn't realised that. That was a kind of like there was a seed of doubt there. So the seed seems to be a little bit. It lasted a bit longer than, and it grew a little bit more than yours. You just thought, no. But then reading the primal wound, I thought, well, maybe this is this. Nancy Verrio talks about wanting to control things, fear of rejection, um, and all sorts of things. And what when I read that book, I swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. I thought, this is true. And that took me down. It didn't take me down particularly dark, but it did take me down. And it made me think that I would be stuck with this because the predominant concern in my life was not being good enough at business, right, or not being able to achieve the business success that I wanted. And if you're not good enough at business, then you can become better at business, right?
Sure.
You can go on training courses, you can learn more, you can try new things, you can sack staff and hire new ones. You can become a more emotionally intelligent leader. There's all sorts of things you can do to. Whereas I felt that if adoption had messed me up, then I was stuck with it, and I was going to be stuck with it, and that took me down a little bit, and it's like, but my take on it was that, as I did a little bit more thinking, a bit more talking around, is that essentially that, not wanting to be rejected is a human thing.
Sure it is.
Not an adoption thing. Wanting to control things, again, it's a human thing. Feeling insecure sometimes, that's a human thing as well. So I felt that Nancy Verrier was hanging what is human on a peg called adoption. Was kind of my take on it. And I think, when we get a diagnosis, then everything becomes about, there's a freedom associated with the diagnosis, and then the diagnosis becomes who we are, and it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But that's fascinating. What's wrong with me for not fit for feeling okay? I've in another group, I've been an adoptee group. I've been accused of toxic positivity, which I thought was an interesting one.
Yeah, that's quite a phrase.
Yeah, toxic positivity.
I think, I think the concern is that you can be so positive that you deny reality. But by the same token, you can't have your life scripted, by a book or by a single philosophy. I had the same feelings that you did. I had my failings, I had my shortcomings, and it would have been very easy to say, okay, well, I'm a bad leader because, or I'm a bad person in relationships because. But when I looked around, there were lots of people who had those same shortcomings who were not adopted.
Yeah.
That's not the answer to everything.
No. Because you said, last time you said it's a part of me, but it's not who I am.
Exactly.
Yeah. As you've gone into the adoption space, what have you learned about that? What have you learned about that space, sort of beyond your own learnings and your respect for your birth mother? What have you found in the adoption space?
Well, I think what I found in the space is just the diversity of experience within that community. And I think also one thing that I found, and it was probably, well, I don't know if it was naive. One thing I found is I believe there's a great population of adoptees who are not listening to adoptee podcasts, who are not in adoptee support groups, who are not on social media, and who are not under analysis. And some of them are doing just fine. Some of them are probably struggling with it, but there's a very large unheard from adoptee population out there. Again, some having no need to be heard, others who would probably benefit from knowing more.
Yeah. Wow. So we all, it strikes me that, we, some of us look to find groups, and some of us stay away from the whole shebang.
Well, it's interesting. When I released the book is when I became interested in social media and such, because I saw an avenue to come and talk about my experience. And honestly, I expected to find a lot of people with the same experience I had, which was positive. And what I found were a lot of people who did not have positive experiences. And when I took a step back to really think about the situation, satisfied people or people having no particular issues with the situation don't typically go looking for support.
Yeah.
And what I found were the people who needed a sounding board or needed some comfort and support from another person or a community were the ones who were out there.
Yeah.
So, I discovered a population I didn't expect to find. That was probably very naive of me.
Yeah. Well, we don't know what we don't know, right? Did you feel that some of them rounded on you?
Rounded in what sense, Simon?
Rounded. Well, so you know, I was in a group. So people rounded on me, right? On one occasion. I was in a group, and a Facebook group, and I read this long post, and the guy made some interesting comments. I put on the bottom interesting comments. I'm just wondering if there's any lightness here. You talked about coming out of the dark into the light, and he said, like, kind of, what do you mean, or whatever. And I just said, and I just made a what I thought was a genuine a genuine question. And then a few people started coming for me saying that I was denying this guy's truth. I was just asking a question. And then I thought, oh, I've upset them. I didn't go into this group to stir up a hornet's nest. I was looking for a discussion, a learning, an input, not even a debate, not a debate and not a fight. But they saw my question as a fight. So I thought, okay, I better delete these comments because I've inadvertently caused some concern here. And then as I was so I deleted the comments, and then the comments were still coming up from one of the people supporting this adoptee, and there was a sneering comment saying, haha, he's gone, and he hasn't even got the courage of his own convictions. Well, that's not what happened. I caused some inadvertent upset with my toxic positivity or my questions, whatever. I'd been insensitive. I put my hand up to that. What do they say in Latin? Mea culpa. I am at fault. I didn't do it intentionally, but I've caused it. It doesn't really matter whether it's intentional or not. It's lit a little fire in this Facebook group, and I've deleted it. But she came, so that it was. So that's somebody's rounded on me, and I'm wondering whether anybody ever rounded on you in that way, or in any.
Well, I think you're wise to step away. Sometimes it takes more guts to step away than to stand there fighting with people. I sensed some of that negativity was out there, or the potential for it, and I've been very, very, very judicious in what I will post. And typically my posts have been in support of people who have had good experiences or feeling something emotionally that is hurting them, and and basically trying to provide support, and that I can understand those feelings. I've been very cautious to not get into any of those conversations that might be seen, where a response might be seen as antagonistic or
Yeah.
wanting to to get into a discussion that that I don't want to have. It could be at the other end that that discussion is wanted, but I've been very careful to avoid those.
Yeah.
But I know that's out there, and I've seen it in the in the paths of some of these email chains and posts on Facebook.
Yeah. Have you heard the phrase confirmation bias? Have you heard that phrase before?
I've heard the phrase, and I'm really not terribly familiar with it.
Yeah. It means really what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. So it's our inbuilt belief that we're right. And for me, it's like I sometimes use the analogy of a snowball, right? But this is this is like more like a trauma ball. So it's a bit like it's a little bit like a snowball. So we scoop it up and we put it into our hands and we form a little ball, and then we roll it along the ground, and it picks up it picks up the snow as it goes, and it's gonna and it gets bigger, and we're more and more convinced that we are
Mm-hmm.
right in our feelings, thoughts, assumptions, beliefs, the whole thing. The trauma ball is made of the whole thing. So what until we bring it out into the light, you talked about into the darkness, into the light. So we bring this trauma ball out into the light. We kind of have a look at it. Hopefully, the sunlight is going to eventually going to melt the snowball, melt the trauma ball. And if we're struggling a bit, then we might go and see. We might read a book. We might listen to a podcast. We might go see a therapist, and it's like bringing like an industrial heater to this trauma ball, so that we see the truth of who we are underneath this trauma of our beliefs. And that's, I think we all kind of get stuck to a certain extent in our beliefs, and the ball can be rolling in a good way, in a like I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm secure in my sense of self. That can be one ball running one way, but for others people listening, this ball is running the other way, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as we kind of believe more of the stuff that's going on in our head. And then also when we go into, if we then we so we've got some stuff running on for us, so we go into a group, birds of a feather flock together, and everybody, the echo chamber in our heads becomes an echo chamber in a Facebook group.
Becomes a bigger snowball.
Yeah. And that kind of, it all reinforces it, and we become either happier or more traumatized, depending on kind of like who we hang around.
No, I've had a career where I've managed very large groups of people, and oftentimes would have discussions with them, and people always want utter consistency until it pertains to them. And but I would always tell them that the spirit of something, or this is not a black and white decision, it's gray. There's a big margin of error in our thought process. It's not all about the snowball, or it's not all about the desert at the other end. There's someplace in between that probably is the logical place where this discussion should be taking place. The discussion about anything, not just adoption. Life is not a black and white endeavor.
Yeah. You said people wanted consistency unless it came to them. What do you mean?
When you manage 1,000 people, you need rules. And I guess a typical one would be, you're allowed X number of days that you can be away from work before you get into trouble. And you would get people who would get up to that number of days and then come back and say, but my situation is different, so this shouldn't pertain to me. And again, I would get in trouble because I would listen to that. And I sometimes would make exceptions, and I sometimes would not make the exception. That's that gray area again.
Yeah.
And those rules they're guidelines. They're not the Bible.
Yeah. I love this phrase, margin of error in our thought processes. When did you see that for the first time? Do you remember seeing that for the first time, Ed?
Oh Lord, I would think any time in my employment history, there's always been an issue, always been a situation where there's some sort of margin of or wiggle room. It's another phrase.
Yeah.
And it's just someplace where, you know, we're made as an employee, we're paid to make decisions. And I guess the higher up the food chain you go, the more difficult the decisions become. But it's also always a matter of involving your brain and not turning to page 46 in the employee manual.
Yeah, yeah. And the margin, so the I guess you've got the margin, the margin where you're making a decision, a margin of you're managing the margin, but that margin in our own thought processes. When did was there a moment that when that came true for you, when you saw that this wasn't black and white? Do you remember any particular instance of that?
Well, I think I see it just in the day-to-day discussions with the adoption social media groups. There is some place between Nancy Verrier's primal wound and Simon's toxic positivity. Yeah, those are two extremes, and there's a middle ground there where I think, you know, logic and sensitivity and kind treatment, whether of yourself or others, all resides. It's that middle ground.
Yeah,
You know, those two do not butt up edge to edge. There's someplace in between, which is
yeah.
that buffer zone or margin for error.
I sometimes talk about being trauma informed and hope obsessed. Um, and I might look at that hope and in what you just said about kindness. I might think of looking at that, incorporating kindness into that, because for me um, the 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 I'm with you on the middle ground. I think we started, we were in a place of rainbows and unicorns. That's the toxic positivity place. We were in there for many years, and then and it was all, everything was Disney. You know, it had a happy ending, and then it flipped completely. Somehow it flipped completely to the primal wound and the trauma obsession, and the place is uh, logic and sensitivity is a far more fertile middle ground. Think there's more can be explored. More thriving can happen from a fertile middle ground.
I think kindness is a very powerful word. You know, not just for adoption, but any place I've been, my message has always been be kind to yourself and be kind to the people around you.
Yeah,
And I think in many cases, if you can be kind to yourself, then the people around you suddenly get to be much more positive companions.
yeah,
If you're angry at yourself, you look for somebody else that you're not happy with.
yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to share in terms of the? I mean, I think kindness is a great place. In terms of what helps us adoptees thrive.
Boy, I don't know. You know, I set about this project just to write a story, and you know, and have now come to a somewhat different place.
Yeah,
Uh, I'm still a teller of my own story. I've become a little bit more a teller or a student of what I believe birth mothers go through, and I hope to tell more about that and learn more about that, certainly. Uh, but yeah,
uh,
I'm not a scholar in this
no,
issue, and I'm not
no,
sure that anybody truly is. As I've said a number of times, we each have our own unique experience, and we can't imprint that on anybody else. You know, your experience and my experience are two different things, even though
yeah,
we're in the same arena, I think.
yeah, we are. Uh, and I think that we learn more when we're exploring rather than when we're explorers rather than scholars, right?
I think if you were open to learn and a seeker, I think you'll learn an awful lot more than if you decided to wrap your arms around all that you currently know and take that as all
Yeah,
that's necessary to know.
yeah, yeah. I think I'll keep on exploring. Is there anything? Obviously, listeners, as always, there's links to the guests' website and their social, and if they've got a book, there'll be a link to Ed's book back in the show notes. So check that out. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, Ed, before we wrap up?
No, I think not, Simon. I appreciate your time and your good thought. I've been very impressed with the podcast, just in terms of the quality of guests and the diversity of thought that I found there. So it's what drew me to contact you.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
I thank you for that. It's a great service to this community as a whole.
Yeah, and it is intentionally diverse. You know, I'm looking to bring lots of diverse perspectives to the place, in the hope that learning from other explorers helps us explore new things ourselves and helps us to new insights. So thanks very much for coming on the show, Ed, and thank you, listeners, as always, for listening. We will speak to you again very soon. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.